So somebody asked me a little bit about growing peas. So let me kind of go over what I did this year, or what I kind of typically do every year. So with peas, they are a cold tolerant vegetable, and you can grow those early in the spring. Here in Zone 8B in the Pacific Northwest, I can plant my peas in late January, most of February, and be okay. If you get a couple scattered days of frost, they can tolerate a little bit of frost. Daily or weekly frost is not good for it, but it can handle a few days on and off of a little bit of light frost, so it's not a big deal if it goes out a little too early. I tend to wait till about February when we only have maybe 1 or 2 frost days per week, and something that's not super cold, and I plant those. Now with my peas, I typically grow them in perlite, I transfer them into the hydroponic, the water system in the ice chests here in the coolers, and they seem to do just fine. I had to move mine around, as you can see, because I had a rabbit problem. They were chopping off the ends of the snow peas, and so I went ahead and just grouped them together, and I cover them or barricade them. But typically, with your peas, most of you will use potting mix or Jiffy Peat pellets, and that's perfectly fine. With peas, from past experience, I've noticed that I don't have to use potting mix for myself personally. If I want to grow them in rock wool in the cubes, or if I want to grow them directly into K-cups in perlite, they don't need the extra nutrients to grow pretty well. And so I usually start my snow peas just in a tray of perlite and then transfer them into K-cups, or you can just put them into K-cups directly. If you already have the Jiffy Peat pellets or potting mix, you can do that too and sow them right into the ground. One thing about peas, because they're cold tolerant and they can handle a little bit of frost, once the soil is workable and it's where it's not super cold every single night, and you have scattered frost days, you can plant them. So with the peas, I planted probably close to about 80 pea seeds. Now, some of you have been told to go ahead and soak them for a couple hours or overnight. Typically for me, if I'm growing them in the Jiffy Peat pellets or the rock wool, I typically, because I'm soaking those in water or getting them very damp in terms of getting them to soak all the way through, because the soil medium, whether it's the Jiffy Peat pellets or the rock wool, which retains a lot of water, is pretty saturated. I don't really feel like I need to soak them for a couple hours or overnight. Now with the perlite, which is it drains really well. It does still retain the moisture a little bit, but as you can see, I also make sure that it's kind of sitting in a little bit of water here. And so because of that, I'll tend to, if I'm using just perlite to start my seeds indoors, I will go ahead and soak my pea seeds maybe for an hour or two at most. I typically don't do it overnight, which you could do, but I typically soak mine just 1 or 2 hours while I'm prepping and getting everything together, and then I'll put it in the perlite. Most of my seeds that I grow from rock wool or from Jiffy Peat pellets, or if I was to even use the potting mix and use seed starting trays, because it's so saturated and wet by the time I put the seeds in, I don't want to get my seeds to rot too quickly. But the fact that it's already wet enough, I don't feel like I need to soak my seeds overnight. So that's a personal preference for you guys. You guys can decide whether or not you want to soak them overnight. You don't want to soak them too much, because they will kind of split in half if you soak them for 24 hours. So just do them in the evening. If you take your seeds, put them in a bowl, and use tepid water. It can be room temperature water. I tend to have a lot of room temperature water just because I have jugs for my indoor fruit trees, the ones that go indoors during the winters and cold days, cold nights, I tend to have a lot of water that's at room temperature ready to go. And so what I'll do is just take the tepid water, room temperature water, and I'll put some in a bowl, and I'll go ahead and soak my seeds for anywhere from 1 to 2 hours to even overnight, and then transfer them into the perlite cups that I typically do with peas. Peas are they grow pretty well, and they don't need the extra added nutrients, and so I can get away with just growing them in perlite or in rock wool, and they tend to sprout very quickly. For some vegetables, they tend to grow better and mature and grow 3 to 5, 6, 9 inches a lot better with the potting mix or the Jiffy Peat pellets. So like with this one here, I think this is tomatoes or peppers. And with these, I'll go ahead. These look like jalapeno peppers. And with these, I noticed that once it sprouts and, they start setting their second and third true set of leaves, they do like the added nutrients. And so I have kind of leaned more toward growing my tomatoes and peppers and jalapenos and hot peppers more in either the potting mix or the Jiffy Peat pellets. When it comes to the snow peas, sugar peas, and snap peas, I just tend to use a lot of perlite. Now, in this 5-gallon Home Depot bucket, I went ahead and drilled a hole kind of halfway up. And because I do a lot of growing in hydroponics, by the time the plants are about 3 inches tall, I kind of start using the water-soluble fertilizer. And so what I basically do is when they're tall enough and starting to get more mature, I transition to a very light solution mix. And so I probably use maybe 20% solution mix and 80% regular water. And then I'll fill this up in the 5-gallon bucket here. I have a hole drilled about halfway up so it doesn't overflow, because I don't want the roots to be sitting in full water, but enough so some of the roots do get water the system. The portion that is from the midway point all the way up to where the perlite line is, there are roots there, and they're not sitting in water, and so they're not going to rot. They're going to be able to breathe, because roots still need to get oxygen and still be able to breathe. And if you fill 100% of the roots in water or water solution, fertilizer solution, it kind of chokes them off, and they're not able to get the oxygen that's needed. But in general, with the peas, they're early season spring vegetable. And so I plant them after I plant my cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels, and cabbage. Those are the ones that I go first, because they're frost tolerant and they're very cold hardy. And so I think I started those late January, early February. And then as soon as we got into February, I went ahead and planted about 80 seeds of the sugar peas, snap peas, and snow peas. I did grow from seed. Majority of them, I just put them in the K-cups in perlite. And then the ones that I knew that I was going to grow them in the buckets, I went ahead and put about 10 to 15 seeds in the bucket. And the ones that are in perlite, I did soak for about an hour or two just to get them a little bit hydrated, to give them a jump start. If you're doing rock wool or Jiffy Peat pellets or using a seed starter tray, that mix, if you're using potting mix, you're going to go ahead and wet that potting mix pretty well. And so it's going to be pretty damp. And so by the time it drains a little bit, that soil is going to be pretty wet and damp. And so if you didn't want to pre-soak your seeds, that'll be perfectly fine. I don't think it makes much of a difference. You're only saving a day or two anyways. But I definitely want to avoid having the seeds rot or get too saturated before they sprout. And so when it comes to using rock wool or using Jiffy Peat pellets or seed starter trays using the potting mix with snow peas, I tend to avoid soaking them overnight. It's only with a perlite that drains really well and it's not real damp. I'll go ahead and soak them for about 1 to 2 hours. Now, as you can see, the snow peas are doing pretty well. I had the a rabbit problem, and so they started chewing off some of the ends, and you can kind of see some of the ends are still, there's some little bite marks on them, and so they're just coming back now. Now, the one key with the sugar peas, snow peas, and snap peas that you got to keep aware of is they will continue to flower and provide you a good garden, a good supply of peas, as long as you're picking your peas on a regular basis. If you let your peas start to fully ripen and mature and get to the full size, it kind of sends a message to the plant that, hey, I need to start flowering and shutting down. And so it's really important with things like peas and beans that you pick them regularly. And I actually tend to pick my peas and my beans just before they reach full maturity, because I don't want the plant to sense that the peas are fully mature and they're going to go ahead and form the seed inside and the plant is going to shut down. I want this to keep on producing for me. And in order for peas to continue to produce, it's got to get the sense that there's not ripe peas that are forming the seed inside their pods. And so I kind of tend to pick mine just before maturity. Before they get to the full size. They're still regular peas, and I'm able to eat the sugar peas, the snow peas, and the snap peas, but I'm not letting the pods inside fully mature. And this allows the peas to keep on growing and keep on flowering new growth and vegetation, and then it allows me to have a longer harvest. And the key thing with peas and beans is to not make sure that you don't let the peas and the beans and the seeds inside to reach full maturity. So that's why I don't let my beans even grow past about 5 inches, 5-6 inches, because I want to pick them a little bit earlier before the pods inside, the seeds inside mature. And that way I will have beans and peas growing throughout the whole entire season. Now, peas are a cool crop vegetable, and so they like temperatures no higher than about 70 to 75 degrees. And so I can plant them in the early spring and they'll be just fine. Once the weather is consistently over 70 degrees, over 75 degrees, they start slowing down their growth and flowering. They don't like a lot of hot weather. And so the plant will stop flowering and adding new vegetables once the weather is consistently on a daily basis over 70, 75-ish. And so I make it a point to grow my peas early on. Here in zone 8B, it doesn't get that hot for most of the year until we get into the summertime. So I don't have that fear, but once we get into the middle of summer and we're consistently having daily temperatures above 75, I'll see the snow peas, and later on with the beans, they're going to go ahead and start slowing down the vegetation growth, and it won't flower as much. And so that's why I try to get a jump start on my peas early in the spring and try not to forget about planting them, because I want the harvest to go on as long as possible. But as you can see with the peas here, the stems are pretty thick now, and the little tentacles that grab onto other things, they're going to go ahead and I can see that these peas are probably going to start flowering here within at least the next couple weeks, especially with close to 70-degree weather coming on a regular basis, probably starting next week. Based on the weather report I looked at, I'm going to probably see some flowers on here in less than 2 weeks. And from there, as the peas form, I'm not going to let them get to full maturity. I'll keep on plucking them off immediately, so that way the plant will keep on sensing that it needs to keep on flowering and adding more pods. and I'll be able to get a harvest a lot longer. So that's the key with the peas. We have one day here that's going to get into the mid 30s. We have a day that I think it's going to be like 72 degrees, and it's going to be a nice sunny day, but also the nighttime temperatures with no cloud cover will make it colder, and that's perfectly fine. You know, you get a couple days out of the week where you get in the low 30s or mid 30s. That's perfectly fine for peas. They're a cold tolerant and frost hardy vegetable, and so you get a couple of those scattered throughout the week, you're perfectly fine. I probably could have started these snow peas in mid-January or late January, but I think I grew most of mine in February. Just waited just to be on the safe side, because you're not saving that much more time by waiting a couple weeks. And so I waited until most of the frost was done, and then I planted the seeds indoors. And then it took about a couple weeks for the plants to get to about 3 to 6 inches, and that's when I went ahead and transferred them either into the ice coolers with the hydroponic, the deep water culture system. And then I also put a few in the 5-gallon Home Depot buckets. And I'll tell you, I really like this Home Depot bucket method. I went ahead and crammed about 7 to 10 plants per bucket, and they're all thriving. I mean, they're jam-packed in there, but the bucket's pretty deep, and so the root systems, I'm pretty sure down there, is forming really well. And every bucket that I have with the peas have done really well. And like this one here, this bucket here, where it's amazing how this bucket gets a lot more sun because it gets the morning sunshine earlier. So it gets probably an hour extra sunlight per day. And then on top of that, as the sun comes over the horizon, over the house, it gets an extra hour in the evening. And look how much taller these snow peas are in this bucket versus the bucket over there, where that one is probably a good foot shorter. And so having that extra 2 hours of extra sunlight has really made this batch of snow peas grow so much better. But they're ready to probably flower. I can tell by the type of leaves that are coming out here and the ones that are clumped right here. It looks like it's going to flower here or start flowering and setting the pods here in a couple weeks. And so I'll be ready to harvest those very shortly. In the previous video, I talked about my lettuce. Look at this. I did that lettuce video, a couple days ago? Look at this lettuce. It's, I cut that lettuce a few days back, and you saw the video a couple days ago where it was coming back and I had a few leaves that I could have cut, but I didn't. And now look at this, a couple days later, I actually have pretty good leaves here that are about 3 to 5 inches in this bucket. And so what I'll probably do is this evening I'll come through here and I'll just go ahead and cut off the tops of this lettuce, both the Buttercrunch lettuce on the left and the red leaf lettuce on the right, and I'll have that for dinner tonight. But that's a little bit about the snow peas, sugar peas, and snap peas. Hopefully that helps you and helps everybody else who's watching out there. And if you have any additional questions or things you want me to talk about, just let me know. Thanks.